Hello friends, welcome back to our channel. So in our previous video we have seen what is the additional domain controller, how we can set up the additional domain controller and what are the use cases of additional domain controller. So in today's video we will see what is a read-only domain controller, what is the use cases and how we can set up a read-only domain controller. So before we dig into our topic, please do not forget to subscribe the channel. So what is a read-only domain controller? the name itself the name itself says it's only a read-only domain controller, which means it does not have any write permissions on the domain controller. So what are the use cases why we use a read-only domain controller? For example, you have a headquarters and you have a branch office. If the office doesn't have much employees or there is no physical security available, so in that case you will install a read-only domain controller. So what is the advantage in terms of security? Because the read-only domain controller does not have any reverse replication. So only the domain controller, which is a writable domain controller, will replicate the objects to read-only domain controller. Any changes from read-only domain controller will not have the replication to the your domain controller. So this will secure your domain controller. If there is an physical threat or if there is like any attack on the read-only domain controller, that will not have any effect on your domain controller. Now, in terms of security, this is the use case for a read-only domain controller. Now, for example, in your branch office, there is a less number of employees, and also like you don't have any domain admins or any IT guy who has good knowledge about the Active Directory. So you can install the read-only domain controller in the branch office, and you can centrally manage this from your head office. I hope you understand what is a read-only domain controller. So let's try to set up the read-only domain controller. The prerequisite for a read-only domain controller is you need a Windows operating system 64-bit, and you need to install Active Directory domain services as well. So I have already set up the machine, a read-only domain controller, and how to set up the machine and everything we have already seen in our previous videos. So I have set up the machine, I have installed Active Directory domain services, I have assigned the static IPA also. So let's see if it is reachable to our domain controller. Okay, it's pinging. So now after installing Active Directory domain services, we need to promote this server. So if you see here the uh, exclamation here, when you click on this flag, you will find an option promote this server to a domain controller. So just click this, promote this server to a domain controller. Now select the option add a domain controller to an existing domain. Then select the domain here. Here you need to provide the domain. You need to provide here the domain controller credentials. Select the domain, click OK. Now click on Next. Here you need to select read only domain controller option and enter the DSRM password and click on next. Now in these options here you can see accounts that are allowed to replicate the passwords to the RODC. Now for example, the users that you add in this section, those users will have the passwords replicated to the RODC. So that in case the primary site, yani your domain controller is down or there is a breakage in the bandwidth, your WAN link, then these users will be able to log into the RODC and to maintain the server or to maintain the uh, health of the domain controller or to upgrade the patches of the domain RODC. So let us add here one user. Uh, what users we have? Let's see. Okay, Chris Gale. I have added this user here, and in this section, accounts that are denied from replicating passwords to the ROTC. So all the operators, servers, and backup operators, these users will have the passwords not to be replicated to the RODC. Because if the passwords are replicated, then there is a security issue. If there is a less security available in the RODC branch office. So far as of now, I will keep this as a default. Then click next. Now here replicate from. So, because ADC is the additional domain controller that we have installed in the previous video. So, that's why it's showing additional domain controller and domain controller. So, I will choose our main primary domain controller DC01. Or you can also keep it by default any domain controller. So, but here in case I will choose my primary domain controller and I will click next. Then click next. Here just go through all the options that you have selected if you want and then click next. Then the prerequisite check for installing domain controller as a read-only domain controller will be taking place. So all prerequisite checks passed successfully. Click install to begin installation. So I will click install. The installation is finished. Now it will restart our domain controller, the read-only domain controller. So meanwhile, we'll go to our primary domain controller and let's see what are the things will be get replicated. And go to server manager, click on tools, click on Active Directory users and computers. So expand our domain. And here I have a folder one desktop. So this one desktop finance and IT department, these should be replicated to read-only domain controller. This Google Chrome is installing because we have seen how to install a Chrome application using a group policy. So because of that group policy, here the Chrome application is being installed. This is our additional domain controller. So tools, Active Directory, users and computers. So under finance department, I will create one user here. If I create a user in additional domain controller, it should also be available in our primary domain controller. So I will try to create a user in additional domain controller. That last name man. So user name will be b dot man. Click next. So I have created a user Batman. So now this should be replicated to our primary domain controller. So let's go here and try to refresh in our primary domain controller. So under finance, we find the Batman. So let's go to the read-only domain controller and check. Let's open Server Manager. Go to Tools and Active Directory Users and Computers. And before that, let's go to our primary domain controller and see in the domain controllers. Okay, so in our primary domain controller, now there is one more under domain controller, we have read-only domain controller available. So getting back to ROD, read-only domain controller, expand our domain, and in the domain controllers, you can see three. And now here one text top organization unit is available. That means our data is replicated from our primary domain controller. So we have here two users. So these users are replicated from our primary domain controller. Let's try to create another user. Let's say it as mm, Superman. S dot man. Next. So now we are able to create a user here. So because this is a read-only domain controller, here you can see that options are enabled. This should not be enabled. Why it is enabled? Because I have logged into this RODC using my domain administrator account. So we have to, if you have seen, we have assigned Chris Gale to replicate the password for this read-only domain controller. So we will just try to log in with our Chris Gale account. Sign out. getting this error that Chris Gale is unable to log in. Why? Because Chris Gale doesn't have any delegation to maintain this RODC. So in order to allow this user Chris Gale, who is a admin at RODC branch, to maintain this RODC server, we need to have a delegation for Chris Gale. So I will go to the main domain controller, and I will go under domain controllers. We will have read-only domain controller. Right click and go to properties, and here under managed by, I will click on change, and I will type the name Chris Gale. So the Chris Gale is added here. So I will apply and OK. Now go to our read-only domain controller and try to log in. Now he is able to log into the server. Let's open Server Manager. Go to Tools and Active Directory, Users and Computers. Here we have all the users and OUs replicated from our primary domain controller. Now here if you can see, there is like a few options is already disabled here in read-only domain controller. So in this way, we can be able to create our read-only domain controller if there is no an IT expert is available in your branch. Now if you see here, if you right click also, you do not have any option to create a user as well. So here you cannot create any user also. If you want to create a user, you have to create a user from your primary domain controller. If you create a user who is there, it will replicate in RODC. What here the administrator can do in RODC, he can just reset the password, he can disable the account if you want, and only the available options what is available here. So here also if you can see that most of them are already grayed out. These also cannot be managed from read-only domain controller. So in such cases we will use the read-only domain controller. So I hope you have got the clear idea about read-only domain controller. So in our next video, we will see what is a DHCP replication, why we need a DHCP replication, and how we can configure the DHCP replication. I hope you like this video. So stay tuned for more upcoming videos, and please do not forget to like, comment and subscribe. Thank you.